still here, and tonight we are going to talk about something different than all the other stuff. No more about alcohol, economics, politics, war, anything like that. We're going to talk about something very different. You can get a whiskey or whatever if you want to, throw some alcohol into it. But we're going to really talk about some of the other deeper underlying spiritual, religious, metaphysical parts of China and its worldview and the world that it inhabits, really, and the whole civilization it created and everything it talks about beyond the social and political and economic world that we just kind of inhabit in our day-to-day life. So with that introduction, we're going to talk about, I think Taoism is probably the way to start, the thing to bring us into this whole discussion. And Taoism is not really what people think it is. In a lot of ways, it is a much more mysterious sort of thing. It's also much older in a lot of ways. What we know as Taoism, what came to be known as Taoism, is one of many, many ideas and interpretations of a general spiritual sort of metaphysical worldview that developed in China. And the fundamental characteristic of it, there's a whole cosmology, things I can get into in another video, but the basic essence of the story is that the world was created, and then a whole series of various substances and energies were created as the world formed, right? The same way there was Adam and Eve, and there's the Garden of Eden, there's all that kind of thing. There's a similar, not similar, but there's a similarly origin-focused story in China. Basically the civilizational origin story, at least one of the many ones that China had. So just to be clear, there are many, 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 many of these stories in China. China was a very vast, diverse place with an enormous number of different groups. It was only as it was consolidated, basically in the second half of the first millennium BC, that any of this started to come together into one cohesive story. But the more interesting thing is that that is more of the political side of things, which we're not talking about. On this same more spiritual side, there was bizarrely more agreement. And so the gist of what this story came to say is that there was a beginning to the world. Basically, the world was born out of chaos. And out of that chaos, you got two things. You got two primeval energy sources that basically create and compose the whole universe. And those are the famous Yin and Yang forces that everybody knows, and they are the two components of the yin yang symbol that everyone also knows and has probably been vaguely fascinated by since they ever saw it, right? That was at least my case. I remember just staring at it as a kid being like, what on earth is this thing talking about? So I'm not going to go deep into what that yin yang talks about, but the gist of it is that it is an image of yin and yang and a sort of perfect harmony of these forces, which don't exist in perfect harmony. But the idea behind yin and yang, the yang is the bright, the masculine, the ordered, the structured side of things. The feminine is the sort of darker, more creative, more chaotic side of things. And in general, the better, highest level abstraction to think about these things and the way it was really conceived at the deepest level in China was as order and chaos. That is the two sides to this coin. And to the coin of yin and yang. And the odd thing is that the yang side of things, the yin side of things, the chaos side of things, is actually like the baby chaos, right? There's a sort of great mother chaos that was the one that birthed the whole universe and got the whole party started. There's also a bit of a great father order that kind of set that whole process in motion. But that is for another time for sure. We're not going to talk about that now. But in general, this yin yang, this became the two dual creative forces that sort of interacted, and from them you generated the rest of the world, right? That is the sort of generative origin story of how things happen. You got these two forces, they interacted, they merged, they coalesced, they recombined and combined, they created new energies and new substances. You got things like chi, you got five elements, you got all sorts of things, and this was what eventually led up to more and more sophisticated combinations of yin and yang and the new substances, the new energies, and eventually you got all the way up to humans. That is the general story of creation, basically, in China. And the thing to know about this is that yin and yang is really still with us, right? We live in a dual world. It is not one, it is not the other. it is both, right? And that is what the yin yang is supposed to remind us, and it is what it's supposed to tell us. And it actually has a deeper story about how we're supposed to live or navigate within this world. But in general, this dual world is the world as far as China is concerned. And it is really reinforced at every moment of Chinese history. When you have giant ordered states that appear, oh my God, how did something like this appear in the first place? How did you get a dynasty and empire in the first place? How did this happen? It's amazing. And then you get generations of chaos, right? You get all this mass political struggle, you get natural disasters, you get invasions, you get famines, you get all the stuff that would hit, and you just have these recurring cycles, the recurring reappearance or appearance of order and then chaos, and you get all these combinations and permutations and composites of the two. And that is what China saw the world as being, and it wanted to remind itself of that with the yin yang, and basically in a million other ways. Just so people know, if you're doing Tai Chi, for example, or you're doing Loose the Dragon style Tai Chi that I'm most familiar with, but also the others as well, and historically it's been a long lineage with this stuff. If you're sort of tracing the symbol, if you're doing a lot of these sort of flowy motions that people are probably aware of with Tai Chi, you see people like make balls and stuff. The one of the things you're doing is also tracing out the actual yin yang Tai Chi symbol. That's what's happening. It's kind of pulls itself into many aspects of Chinese life. It appears everywhere. It appears in Chinese traditional medicine. It appears in acupuncture. It appears in architecture. It appears in calligraphy. It appears in music. It appears everywhere. It is one of those things. It is the creative duality of the world that appears in all sorts of places. And for a relevant Western comparison, pretty much since the 19th century, starting with a lot of German sort of philologists and old humanities type scholars, they really started to focus on this idea of the Apollonian and the Dionysian elements of the world, right? So this is basically an ordered side of things, an ordered light bringing side of things, and then a sort of creative, dark, trance-like, perhaps violent side of things. And you had this same balance, right? This is basically the sort of artistic and even civilizational theory that really captured Nietzsche, and that he used to look at the world and used to analyze art at that time, think about Wagner, all that kind of stuff. It is something that reappears. And in general, this idea of a dyad, of a dyadic sort of pair that create all sorts of things, this seems to be part of the universe, right? This is the way things happen in some sense. And in a lot of ways, what these philosophies, these ancient cosmologies, the ancient spiritual systems were looking for is a type or the highest level of abstraction you could bring these binaries, right? These polarities to, right? What was the highest one you could find, or at least the most capacious, the one that can help explain the most, describe most things in the world. And in China, the answer to this question was order and chaos. At the sort of late beginning of sort of the 20th century, late 19th century, a lot of Western scholars and stuff really focused on more of an Apollonian Dionysian thing. And that is, right, I mean, this is again a very similar thing. It sounds like order and chaos. And most kind of things you find are basically sort of permutations of this. And I personally think that the order and chaos one is actually maybe the more useful, but you don't just want to forget it, right? You don't want to forget all the other ones, right? So in China, male, female, light, dark, sleep, day, wake, all these things, they all map onto yin and yang. And so when people are talking about, oh, yang energy, yin energy, all that kind of stuff, even in India, similar things are going on. This isn't trying to say that, oh, this is yes, you could conceive of it as a sort of divine masculine or divine feminine. That is true. But I think a better way to think about it is that all sorts of these later binaries, these sort of things that appeared later on in the development of life, universe, reality, all that, they all partake of these sort of fundamental generative principles. They're sort of aspects of them. And if you want this sort of deeper understanding, you actually have to peel away from, oh, let's talk about I'll use divine feminine, divine masculine, because that is a sort of really common thing in our very gender confused, gender troubled, sex involved world, right? Where we have declining populations, we have real struggles with relationships, we have all these things going on, let alone industrialization, urbanization, all the problems that have come with that, the advance of technology, integration of both sexes into the workplace, challenges in home life, all this stuff is coming in to radically transform and alter relations between both human sexes. But in general, so we've just become really absorbed with masculine, feminine, all that kind of stuff. But it is very useful if you want to understand a place like China. The way to do it is not to think, let's map our preoccupation with current problems and challenges with sex and relationship and all that kind of stuff to ancient civilization. It's probably the better way to do it, the more enlightening, the one that can bring the knowledge from the past, from that civilization, back to you, back to your questions on, well, war, life, relationships, all that kind of stuff, is to actually try and find what they were really thinking about and the way they were thinking about it and why. So I'm trying to give a little bit of that just right now. And this dual world of yin and yang is a really good way to enter this world, right? It is maybe perhaps the best one, actually. If you don't want to get into anything about politics, anything about economics, and you're looking for more of a civilizational soul to China, the place to go is, for sure, what came to be known as Taoism. This was the spiritual soil in China. This is the basic sort of substructure that later Christianity, Buddhism, even a lot of forms of Confucianism, all sorts of bizarre administrative philosophies and policies, all sorts of aesthetic and artistic movements, all of these sort of partook in this same world, this same Taoist soil that is really the spiritual soil of China. And just to give a little tease about more about where this comes from, in a real way, the reason this Taoism is so interesting in China, it was so compelling to China, and it's also been compelling around the world. There are few things about China, from China, that have been as successful, just even in sending a symbol around the world, right? No one knows any symbols related to Confucianism. No one knows anything related to most things in China, aside from architecture and stuff you see, but pure symbols that are trying to express ideas, powerful ideas. You really almost can't find one, and nothing even close to the scale of recognition and notoriety really that the yin yang found. And it is one of those cases where this isn't just some stupid toy symbol. It actually was very important. You can go to all sorts of martial arts studios. You'll see variations of a yin yang above you. You'll see there's forms of the yin yang that have further symbols around them, typically related to the I Ching or other divination, other elements of sort of deeper Chinese mysticism, cosmology, stuff like that. But it is a real powerful, important symbol and really, really valuable one. And again, that entrance into this Chinese world, because as things continue with China, as things continue to degenerate, the economics degenerates, the politics degenerates, the social relations degenerate, the international situation degenerates, you aren't going to want to just rely or just think about all of the geopolitical sides of things. It really won't give you a good sense of really what's going to happen in China. First of all, I mean, you'll know in the general outlines of things, but it also won't give you that sense of what really happened and really where things came from. Where's the actual deeper meaning behind the grand material accumulation and transformation seen in China? This is sort of the way deeper questions that don't really get asked. And obviously, I'm projecting forward in a lot of ways because I'm trying to get some of this stuff out before it gets swamped, right? The typical thing that happens in history is that people get very into China for a while. It's doing, particularly when it's doing really well. So that'll be Marco Polo when he was there for the Yuan dynasty, when it had just sort of absorbed all the great achievements of the Song, which was sort of the greatest Chinese dynasty. It looked amazing. It was just stunning. Europe was stunned. Similar things when the Christians, the Catholics in particular, were in Beijing during the Ming dynasty, and in various periods in Chinese history. This is just a recurring theme. A lot of people in the parts of the Qing, and then it declines, and you start to see people just turn on China, right? You basically, there is the same dual nature that China saw in the world is seen in the perception of China and its wealth and its power and its the sense that it's ascending or descending. So when China's on the upswing, people around the world think, oh, wow, what a country. It's enormous. It's amazing. It's integrated. It's powerful. Let's get ready for what it can do. And then things go bad and people look at it and they're like, oh, wow, this country is a mess. It is in so many pieces. How does it ever manage to come together in the first place? This is actually what happens again and again. And so what I've been trying to do is move beyond this just really stale look at things where we're only really seeing the last couple decades at most of what's going on, and there's no sense of the whole, and what is embedded and embodied within the whole ends up being forgotten, totally forgotten and just missed. And it's almost impossible to bring it up because there's no space to give that context for everything that's going on, and then to sort of have the material context and then try and get to those deeper layers. Thank God we have something like YouTube videos, podcasts, where I can increasingly start to just show this sort of stuff. You can see videos, it can be made really small. It's a really great way to get this stuff out there, and a big reason to even listen to this, to even listen to me, to listen to anyone talk about ancient India or yoga or anything really, Aztec civilization, any of it, is because there is an idea, a sense that there's some deeper ancient wisdom. All of your ancestors in general, ancestors, human ancestors in general, weren't all just stupid former hunter gatherers, like gathering roots and praying to weird gods or something, right? It was probably something more there, right? Just in the same way each of our individual lives is so filled with potential and wonder and, you know, big leaps into great feeling, into the depths of despair, all of that stuff. It was similar things have been going on for, you know, thousands and tens and tens and tens of thousands and millions of years, right? So there is a lot more embedded in humanity and human bodies, human psyches, all of that, than we really care to look at or to really ponder or to become aware of, really. And that really matters in this context because civilizations, these things we call civilizations, and I use the word civilization a lot because that is the only way, the only accurate way to talk about China. It has not been a nation. Really, it's still barely a nation. This whole grand rejuvenation of the Chinese nation that Xi Jinping talks about, you have never really been a nation. Not even at best, it started in the 20th century as a nation. So that is how new that whole concept is in China. It is so old. I mean, it's the civilization is so old, the nation is new, and the way to think about it is really as a civilization trying to be a state, something that people have said for a long time. And it's good to remember. It's also good for other people around the world to remember that because it helps you remind yourself and your country and your family, community, whatever, that the wherever you happen to live is also part of a civilization, something grander, something more than your political state, something more than your specific political party. And actually trying to find the outlines of all this is extremely complicated and extremely difficult. And often it doesn't have answers that you want to hear, right? Some of the truths of Western civilization aren't exactly what people say when you hear Western civilization sort of trotted out as a big sort of trope in a political argument, right? There's a lot there, and a lot of it isn't really looked at very often because we don't know how to look at it anymore. We're very confused about it. We're trying to push into the future, or it requires rejecting the past a bit. So in Chinese history, recent Chinese history, particularly the 1950s and 60s, China tried to burst itself into the modern world by abandoning the past in all sorts of ways. And it was enormously traumatic, and the scars are all still there. And the actual jolt into the future, into a modern, deep sense of life and of being that is uniquely Chinese and uniquely modern at the same time, that hasn't even been accomplished. It has not been accomplished at all. And one of the major reasons is because these questions of the spiritual soil, of Taoism, of what was going on, is they're just not answered. And even in China, there isn't a great framework for trying to describe this stuff, to talk about it. And in particular in China, you can't talk about history in a non-political context because it's all about the development of the imperial Chinese political state and the modern, basically imperial Chinese political state. And there are very strong guardrails about what you can say and what you can't say. And there's no real way to look at things that doesn't actually really compromise the whole narrative of the great grand Chinese political state. So the whole thing is really compromised in China. And that's kind of the way it is. And that's one of the really sad things where the country that should know more about its own history and more about what's going on, it really can't know because it's in many ways strangled by the stranglehold that the current political authorities have on culture and history and conversation and thought and speech, right? And that's not really unique to the Communist Party. This is just a basic fact of Chinese political life where propaganda and various forms of deep, deep thought and behavior control of the population have been part of this system for over 2,000 years. It's just the way things have to go for reasons I could get into, and I probably will get into in other videos. But for now, it's just sort of the lay of the land, and you can't get around it. But you can't, and if you're in China, you can't get around it. But if you're not in China, you can actually learn a lot of this stuff. If you're of Chinese descent and you've always wondered what is sort of really special and amazing about the culture, and you're trying to figure it out in the context of massive geopolitical turmoil and tribulation, it is a way in, right? And that is really important. And it's not just for people who are Chinese, it's not just for people who are concerned about war and stuff like that. This is, again, part of a deeper human legacy, right? And so just to bring it back to the yin yang symbol for a second, this is more than just a funky symbol. As I said, it is actually something that contains an idea. And the basic idea behind it is that the yin yang is a symbol of order and chaos, of yin and yang in a state of perfect harmony, right? Of sort of ideal balance of these two forces. Throughout history, it's been an object of contemplation and meditation. And obviously, I mentioned with the Tai Chi of symbolic construction. And it is deeply, deeply embedded in China for the one primary reason, probably, if we had to just throw one out there, is because this balance, this question of balance, is really at the core of Chinese civilization. And the reason it has a symbol that is trying to encapsulate it and that is brought up as an ideal and is held up as an ideal and as a symbol of the entire culture is because this is what China has been striving for, but it's also what China has never really been able to achieve. There has never been a Chinese state that has ever really embodied some beautiful composite of these two forces. There's brief periods where they've tried different things and they didn't work out, and they're sometimes valorized. It's a great attempt, and every new Chinese state is always trying to suggest that this is the one that will sort of achieve that greatness. And what you typically get is a tyrannical state that breaks down. Maybe you have a sort of open state early on that is sort of trying to bring in new energy, new life, right? Upping the chaotic portion of the whole balance, and then you quickly have to have a rebalance, and things quickly get out of control, and the state is trying to balance everything, and it sort of falls out of balance, falls out of whack, and falls into trouble and typically into chaos. And that is really the story and the reason why you can talk about the symbolic side of things, right? So I brought up the political side of things just to show you that this symbol endures because of this immediate relation to the whole political world. But the deeper question is that this is actually part of the struggle of individual human lives, right? So it's the wisdom, part of the wisdom in China is that actually striving for this ideal balance is something worth doing, even if you failed for thousands of years. It is part of a process that has sculpted and shaped a very, very impressive civilization, one of the sort of the few great large agricultural civilizations that humanity has, right? There's not many, and China's one of them. And this is one of the key things I think people should always keep in mind in China, is that sense that fighting for that balance is really valuable. And there's been many achievements along the way, even though, unfortunately, it is still a mission unaccomplished. And at least on the political side, a new round of rebalancing of order and chaos, sort of clashing and thrashing all around the country, is probably on the way. What is different, though, this time is that people in China, to some extent, but particularly outside of China, can now learn all of the greatest things about China and sort of even take what China can't embody for itself in its country, and to the extent it has always dreamed of, and just bring it into your life, your families, your communities, your organizations, communities, everything you're part of, your state, if you're really into that, if it's your localities, your corporations, businesses, all these things can search for this similar balance and basically reap really pretty amazing rewards. That is one of the major lessons of Chinese history and civilization, and I hope you remember it. So I hope this was also an enjoyable video. It was interesting and informative. I really, really hope it was. It was a fun one to do, and it's not something I get to talk about as much as I want to. This is some of the deeper stuff. If I really started talking about the ancient Zhou dynasty and sarcophagi and the things they were thinking about and cosmologies, I would probably rapidly have way too much fun. So I'll just leave it at that. I hope you enjoyed the video. Again, please like it, subscribe, throw on notifications. And with that, I hope to hear